Welcome back to the channel. So this is a return to the beginner's guide for armour modelling, and we're going to tackle the Tamiya M4 Sherman. So the idea with this video is it's a series, there's 2 or 3 videos in this series to take you from opening the box all the way to finishing the model to a very good standard as a beginner. All you'll really need that isn't in the box is an airbrush and some paints, and we will get on to painting after this. This video is just dedicated to the build. So starting off, we've got the whole tub there, and we need to put on the sort of transmission housing or the sprocket cover. There is a proper name, neither of those are the right ones, I don't think. Now there's a little bit of it's a little bit vague, this fit, so you just want to get it lined up. There's a bit of movement in it, so as long as you get it lined with that flat edge at the top just being horizontal, all is well. So what we've got here is a bit of a dated kit. Now this is a good place to start because it's cheap and it's a reasonably simple build, but as far as accuracy goes, there are far better kits on the market these days for building all types of Shermans from an accurate point of view. But if all you want to do is just go to your local shop, pick up a kit, get home and build it, there's nothing wrong with this. And it actually has some nice features. So we've got some cast texture there on the transmission cover that we've got there. And there's also some cast marks on there as well, so stamps from the foundry marks, which is also a nice touch. Now we're just trying to line everything up here and get it all in the right position. So we've got these like spaced pieces where the bolts go through. There are technical names for all of these, and on there's actually a seam line going through, but you want to keep that. That isn't a line you want to get rid of. Often we want to get rid of seam lines when they're around moulded parts, but the seam line here is very good at representing the 2 pieces of metal that are actually being bolted together. So we want to keep that in. Now we've got some numbered pieces just here as well, and again I'm just showing you how vague some of the fit is, which is a bit unlike Tamiya, but it is happening on this kit. So you just got to take your time getting these sort of smaller pieces that are all then going to be used as fixing points later for the hull. And if you start dry fitting like we are now with the upper hull, you can just make sure everything's aligned before it sets. It's always good to do a bit of dry fitting. With these parts in the future, and they just need to tuck in underneath these areas there and line up, as you can see, just in along there. So as long as it lines up like that, you're in the right place, and then you can just leave that on upside down, let the glue set, and then you can take the upper hole off once you're happy with that. Some more modern kits for Tamiya, you don't get a lot of this faffing about, so you could also try something there as well from the newer range. So once we've got that area glued in, I just want to now work in around these areas that are meant to be cast. So they should show a cast texture. It should all be one piece. There shouldn't be a join here with these bits that are jutting out where the sprocket's going to go on. So I'm just putting some extra thin, Tamiya extra thin glue around there just to sort of soften the plastic, and then we're going to come in with a brush which has been cut down and just stippling around that just to give it a rough texture so it blends in. Because this was all cast as one piece in the factory, on the real tank. And you can just go back and forth, softening up with the extra thin and then using the brush to stipple it in. And it's a good way of, it's an easy way of putting cast texture onto a model. And now we're still having a look at finishing up the lower part of the hull. So we've got some access doors here for the engine bay, this is the rear hatch, rear backplate to the hull, if you like, and those are access doors. So we're just gluing them shut, and then all of this should fit on and bring the lower hull section complete. It squares it up then, and it's all a nice solid piece ready for moving forward. And that just slots in like that between those two parts that we got placed earlier on. And then that all glues that up, squares it up, and then you can bring those two parts that are sticking upright, and that will bring that all together. We've also got this line of bolts here as well, which completes this front section. And you just line that up for those earlier parts that we saw, the two pieces that are bolted together. They'll slot on as well and bring all of that section together. And again, a nice bit of dry fitting just to make sure we've got a nice join there, and when it's all pressed together it is going to be a nice join, so we know everything's in the right place. And again, we can see some nice features there on the upper hull, some more cast texture and some nice weld beads. And there we are, just offering those parts up now, slotting them in, and it brings it all nice and solidly together. So here we're just dealing with some seam lines, and we've got a sanding stick. These are just cheap. I think they are called sanding sticks. They're on Amazon anyway. They're easy to find. They're colour coded. So this funny sort of turquoise colour is a sort of perfect grit for sanding plastic without leaving too many marks. So just dealing with seam lines, this is what we were talking about earlier. You want to look for these. This is lines that go around the pieces where in the moulding process two parts are being put together in a mould. It leaves a bead of plastic around where those two parts are formed. You just sand that down and then smooth it out with a sanding sponge just to get rid of any grit marks that are left or sanding marks. And you should find that once it's painted you can't see any, as if there was no line there before. It tends to be worse on smaller parts like this. And then when you've got it going around raised detail or areas where it's difficult to sand, you can just put it between some tweezers like this, and obviously beware that it can spring out. So I'm just using my finger there just to make sure it can't spring out. And I'm just scraping it with a nice dull-bladed hobby knife. So when your blades aren't as sharp as they were, that's a good candidate for scraping mould seams and seam lines. And what you can also do at the end there, which I don't show, is you can actually, once it's in place, if you've got any small little bits of plastic left from this, you can see there's some sort of light coloured plastic, you can actually just run around with the Tamiya extra thin brush, like I'm doing there, and it will melt all of those tiny bits of plastic away and they'll just disappear. It's a good way of cleaning that up. See, we've got a bit of a gap there. Just want to make sure that's joined up because that's meant to be all of one piece. And if you've got some clamps, that's a good candidate there, just to stick a clamp on that to hold it together until the plastic glue. You can see with my hesitation here on the video, I'm a little bit surprised at some of the fits on this. It is showing its age a little bit. Now what I'm putting on here, you can see the glue looks a bit thicker, and I've blackened the top of the glue holder, brush holder. So this is Tamiya extra thin. Once you've got to the end of a bottle, you think it's got a bit dirty, because sometimes you can discolour it. That's a good candidate. You can see it's a bit lumpy on the end of the brush. Your old sprues, so Tamiya is some of the best. You can make this thing called sprue goo. And if you save up your bits of sprue from around once you built your model and you cut it into tiny bits, you can drop it into the bottle, and overnight or over a couple of nights that will melt and it will form this thick melted plastic fluid, and you can use that as a nice filler just to brush on in areas. It's only really good for very small seams. And the real benefit to it is it's melted plastic. It melts into the seam, and once it's dry, it sands the same as the plastic around it, so it's quite good. Whereas other ways of sealing gaps and things like that is super glue, which is harder, so you tend to sand more plastic around it before you sand the super glue. So it's just a good thing to bear in mind, and that's called sprue glue. We're just making up a few of the small fittings here again that are going to go on the rear of the vehicle. And again, thinking about seam lines, join lines, what's going to be seen, trying to be neat all the way through the process. That's one of the best ways to go about building the model kits, because the neater you are, the less cleanup you have to do. So if you're careful with the glue and the amount of glue you put on, and when you take your Tamiya extra thin brush out of the bottle, just tap it on the edge so you haven't got too much glue, because you can always go back and get more, but if you flood the area, it's very difficult to clean up, and it runs around your finger, and then you get finger marks, and one small little job turns into quite a big job. Again, another important thing to show here, especially with kits that don't fit quite how you perhaps thought they were going to, is dry fitting. And I'm just there working on that front section again, just trying to make sure that there's enough cast texture there and I'm happy with it. You can always go back and forth. And I'm going over the foundry marks here as well, because they wouldn't have cast texture on them, but they're certainly not, none of it's smooth. When you look at the real vehicles, it's surprising how rough some of these areas are, so you can always go quite far with it. So we're getting ready to tackle the sprockets now, and that black thing I'm pushing in there is called a polycap, and if we can avoid getting glue in there by just gluing around this seam, it shouldn't put any glue in around the polycap, it will leave the sprocket movable when you put it onto the model. It gives it a nice friction fit, but it also still moves, and that's useful for the rubber band tracks that we've got on this kit. It means we can position them nicely. And what I'm showing you here is you've got two types of sprocket, so you just want to choose which one you're going to go for. This here is the idler, and that also has a polycap going in, and that's covered just by this little hubcap there. And again, careful with the glue. Best thing about the Tamiya extra thin is it runs around with capillary action, and once that's positioned, that will be able to move as well. And you'll see later on when we come to place the tracks, it's a very useful thing to be able to move it around the sprocket. And again, now there's a seam line, so this would be a quite highly polished piece of metal, because this would be running on either the metal of the track or the rubber pads on the track, so it would be very smooth. There certainly wouldn't be a seam line there. If there was, it would be burred down quite quickly, so we want to have a nice smooth face to the idler here. And again, that's just going through the grits on the sanding sticks and then going back with a sanding sponge until we're happy that the seam line's gone, and just trying to concentrate. If you can see, I'm doing it along the wheel rather than across it, and that enables or is better at making sure we don't get a beveled edge over the top. We want it really to be nice and square and flat. So if you go along with the wheel like that, it's a good way of ensuring that. There's quite a difference there between the two. And now we're doing the bogies. So we've got two road wheels and a return roller, and that's all sandwiched between these two parts. These are movable as well. And I've gone for the wheels that are hollow, but there's another set of wheels that aren't hollow, but the backs of those wheels are hollow, which doesn't look very good on a model. So I chose these because they got a better look on the finished model. And this is a good candidate again just to clamp together and put the glue just around that actual middle of the bogie and make sure it's all set up nicely, as I have done here, just using cheap clamps from the pound shop, making sure all the wheels are still moving. Again, we've got nice stamped foundry marks down the middle there, which adds to the detail. In front of the return roller, there's a guide for the tracks to run across, and again, that would be smooth. So that would be a flat piece of metal, quite smooth. So we're just going over that now. Again, to keep it square, I'm not using a small stick or a sponge. I'm using a wide, stiffer sanding stick just to keep that nice and straight. And using all the methods we've shown before, so I've done a little bit of scraping, using the smaller sanding stick, and now just going in with that sanding sponge to make sure everything's smoothed over. Once we're happy with that, we can also then use just a bit of sparing Tamiya extra thin around that, just to burr anything down as well if there's any bits of sanding dust left. And here we are with the other 5 to give us the 6 sets of bogies that all now can be set up on the lower hull and squared up. And now we're going to offer them up to the lower hull, and it's a nice good join, nice and true. It doesn't move very much, so my best advice here, as there is a tiny bit of movement, is to get all 6 glued on and then get a nice flat surface and make sure all the wheels are touching that surface. Add a little bit of weight. You can put the Tamiya extra thin bottles in there or some paint pots or anything like that, and just let that all set up nicely. And there we are. So I'm using a steel ruler here just to make sure that everything's in line, and that all the wheels are touching it at the same time. So it's a good test here. Usually you'd see the front or the rear wheel wouldn't move, and here you can see the second wheel in isn't moving, which is a good sign that it's just slightly out of alignment. So you can try it again. There you go. Now that's good enough for me. That second wheel is still slightly out, but as it's going to be around tracks, you won't notice a few sort of 0.01 of a mil being out. And the trouble I'm getting now is the front wheel's almost slightly out, so you can't win them all. You just got to hope for the best and get as close as you can. But it's a nice little trick using the steel ruler, just to, especially when all the wheels move at this point, is a good way of showing it. And then just using the flat side as well, again, when I think they're all nicely lined up. And then once you're happy with that, you just let them set up. And try not to push them around like a toy tank, like I'm doing. So now it's time to move on to the upper hull. And with that, I've left that spacer bar in just really for added strength. So it's time to take that out now. And we're going to add in all of the doors that run along the back there. So there's a few hatches, and then there's 2 big access doors again, because that's where the engine is. Pretty sure the Sherman had a rather large aircraft engine in the back there, which gave it plenty of power. There you can see 3 big pieces of plastic, shut that off, and then we've got a cover there over the air intake just behind where the turret goes. So we've got some hatches at the front, crew hatches. I'm going to add all of the crew and the stowage, so just sort of seeing how they're going to sit, if we've got any ejector pin marks or anything, but it all looks good. It's all designed to be open. I'm just showing you, just posing how they're going to be, but we just clean them up and keep them to one side. And we've got these sections here glued in the front as well, and that's where you place the figures. So if you want to use these figures, you've got a driver and a gunner and radio operator, I presume, and they are going to slot in through that hole. And we've got the exhaust there as well, which again I'm going to keep separate so we can paint them and add them in later. And we've got the light guards there. Now this is one of the main features on a Sherman that stand out. There's a few things on different tanks, but on the Sherman and anything using the Sherman hull, the light guards do tend to look a bit thick out of the box, and these are no different to that. So what I'm just doing here is just trying to thin them with a sharp blade. Now, you don't need to do this. If you try this, you're inevitably going to break them. But I thought I'd give it a go just to see what the plausibility of it is. And it is doable, and the easiest way to do it is to leave them on the sprue, because then that gives a bit of structure to it where they're still attached to the sprue. And then once you're happy with it, you can cut them out, clean them up carefully, and then add them onto the model. If you can fin them, they do look a lot better than going on thick. You can also buy these aftermarket, so you can buy them in etched metal, which can be a little bit difficult, or you can buy already made up 3D printed ones in resin. You just cut them off and glue them on, and they're ultra thin, paper thin. And they really, it's like adding metal tracks, a metal barrel. For the Sherman, it's light guards. If you do that, the rest of the model can look, doesn't need to, it almost falls in line. So now we're just seeing how the tracks are going to look. And these are the gluable type, so these will glue with Tamiya extra thin. You just want to have the joins clamped when you go to do it. But as you can see, like I said, adding them on, we just wrap them around the sprocket, and then you can put them around the rear idler, slot them over the wheels, and then just push the sprocket on, and that's the best way of getting these sort of tracks on. Don't try and loop them around the sprocket and the idler by stretching them. You just take the sprocket off, put it around the tracks, and then put the sprocket on. It's much better. Now you can see they sit nice and tight. No wrong with that. They look very good. Now, what I'm actually going to do here is cut off that second loop, because I found them a little bit too loose when I was test fitting, and there is an option for it here. So if you cut straight along there and along those two bolts sticking out, cut through the middle. So I'm actually going to cut these now, and you just need to remove the teeth and those bolts that are sticking out the side, and then that will slot in to what's already there on the other end. And if you do this, you'll get a much tighter join, and you won't have so much slack. That's really what we're trying to get. The rubber band tracks can look like they're sort of springing off, whereas obviously they'd be very strong and weighted. So to try and get that weighted look, just by cutting down one link, there's still enough join there. And there you can see that it slots straight in, and is a much tighter join around the wheels, and looks much more realistic. So although they do glue with Tamiya extra thin, I'm going to hammer on the super glue there just to make sure it's a good strong join. And we don't need to worry about the brittle nature of super glue in this position, because it's going to be holding fine. Super glue works absolutely fine here and gives us a good strong bond. Now we're on to the turret. So we've got a nice gun breech. I'm not going to do too much with this. I'm just showing you that it's in the kit. So we're just going to build it up. But I don't paint it or anything. And then we're on to the gun barrel. Now, unfortunately, there is a tip to the barrel, which is hollowed out. So it gives a nice hollowed out barrel, but we've got this funny join at the end. So first things first, there's a seam line running down both sides of the barrel. So we're using the scraping method, just using the sharp blade, just to try and get that. Now, what you don't want to do is flatten out an area. So you want to keep that curve going right the way around the barrel. So don't press too hard. Just make sure you just knock that seam back a little bit, and then we can use a sanding sponge just to go around that. Rather than something that's solid, this sponge will go around that shape and not leave a flat spot. And you want to try not to go all the way up to the end, because if you go all the way up to the end of the barrel, you'll slightly burr the end over as well, which will be very noticeable on the finished model. And there we go with the gun barrel, and we're just going through the couple of that's the whole mantlet, but there's two sections to it. And then we've got the gun breech at the back, and that whole section holds it together, and then it slots into the turret nicely and should be movable. So after dry fitting, we get all of that glued together and then slot it in and just make sure it still moves. There's polycaps in action in here, I think, as well, if I remember correctly. You only just want to glue that section in around the bolts. And then lastly, all there is to worry about now is the figures and the stowage. So we want to get all of that cleaned up. And there's sprue gates and seam lines around that, so we want to get that sorted. And it's time to glue on the upper hull to the lower hull. I've left the tracks on there just really because I like the feel of it. It'd probably be best to take them off at this point, but it's not a problem. You glue around everywhere where the hole fixings are for the upper hull, and the tracks can come on and off independently. So we've got the tracks off there, and what we're going to do is put the side fenders up onto this model, which we've just got there made out of the off camera, and all the parts now are placed on my piece of wood into white tack, ready for painting. So we're going to prime everything with this Mr. Surfacer 1200. This is a cellulose based product. You can use other primers that aren't so smelly, so we'll do that in the next video. We'll talk more about the primers and paint that we're going to use. So hopefully that was of interest, and thanks for watching. If you like what you see, do consider subscribing. Let me know your comments down below, and if you're following along with this, stay tuned for the next part of this build series, which will be out next week, covering painting, and then we'll finish it all off with weathering and bringing the whole model together. And we're in the primer stage here. So this is a particular type of paint. This isn't just normal paint. Primer is a very good paint to give you a base for your further paint colours. And for what we're doing, olive drab, you can use a number of different colours, but I've gone for a nice light grey. This does two things: gives you a really nice base coat for any colours on top for them to pop and look how they should. But it's also for showing any imperfections on the plastic and on the build. You can see any seam lines you've missed, any glue stains, any extra bits that you need to sand down, gaps, all of that. So it's very good. Now, it's more important on aircraft, but it's useful on armour to put a good base coat down. Just showing you here as well, with the primers, you can sand them as well if there's any sort of rough patches. Just sort of very lightly, just buff them down, because you really want the smoothest of smooth coats as you can possibly get for the paint to then come on top. And there's often little flecks that get caught in the paint. This is Mr. Surfacer from a jar finned with levelling thinners from the Guns range, but you could use a Tamiya spray can, you could use Halford's primer or any car automotive primer, anything like that in a spray can. Do it outside, obviously. You want to be very careful of the fumes, don't want to be doing it inside, and you still want to be wearing a face mask if you're outside. And then when you've got this nice coat down, we can start to think about the paint we're going to put on top of it, which will be Tamiya acrylics in this instance. We won't get into the ins and outs of it. They're kind of like a hybrid acrylic, but for layman's terms, we can thin them with water or we can thin them with cellulose thinners. We're going to use Tamiya's X20A, which is their acrylic thinner for their acrylic line of paints, which is the XF range of paints, and that's what we're going to use here. And I'm just showing you there that we're going to put the sand shields or side fenders on, which will cover the tracks. Now these are the rubber tracks, so they're made up, and we saw that in the previous video where we cut a piece out to make them tighter. This is the primer that we've used here as well, and that's also going to be sprayed onto these rubber tracks. Then we're going to paint them a rubber black colour. And it's all again about preparation. So just getting ourselves ready now, getting all the parts off, so the turret, the hull, we've got all the wheels on there, but keeping the tracks separate. And here's a close-up of the tracks as well. You can see there's a little bit of flash there around the, I don't know what they'd be called. For lack of a better term, the gowsers that join the tracks together, these bits that stick outside of the rubber pad. But for this build, it's not a problem. I'm just showing you here how we would spray them. I'm using my Ultra airbrush here, Infinity Ultra. I think it would be a 0.2 needle, or 0.4 would be better for primer. So then when we've got our primer coat, what we're using here first off is XF62 olive drab. Going straight on with that, fin down with X20A from the Tamiya range, straight out of the bottle, finned roughly 50-50 or a little bit, fin maybe a little bit more than that. The best way to get a feel for it is just get a test, go back and forth and back and forth. Interestingly, you can see here the trouble I was having initially, not getting a wide coat. That's because I'm using the 0.2 needle. I haven't swapped it out. So if you were using 0.4 needle in the airbrush, or 0.3 or 0.5, anything like that, a little bit bigger, you'll get a wider distribution of the paint, which is much better for doing primer coats, base coats, gloss coats, matte coats, all of that sort of thing, where you want a nice uniform coat all over. If you're going to then try and do sort of freehand camo or detail work with the airbrush, that's when you want to drop down to like a 0.2 needle. You can do it with both. It's just easier to use the correct tool from the beginning. So once we've covered the model with XF62, we're just going to add in a little bit of the dark yellow XF60 into the olive drab paint, which will lighten it and give it a kind of aged look. And you can see the turret has not had that effect, but the hull has. That shows you a difference in the colour. Now this is really just a mist coat. We don't want to go on too heavy. We want that olive drab underneath the darker colour to shine through, but it's about giving an effect. So you can go back and forth with this. You can also lighten this mix again with XF60, so this becomes an even lightened version. And then you can actually do streaks, just painting downward lines, straight lines down from the edges of the hull and anywhere where there might be runs. So now we've just got a few photos here showing how I make a paint wet palette. So I'm using a tray, the lid here of an old Tupperware, and I'm cut some kitchen roll to fit inside. And then with greaseproof paper, we cut a section the same size again as the kitchen paper. And we just lay that on top. Now, greaseproof paper was hard to pin down actually here in the UK. I don't know why, but I was looking for the wrong thing because I think I was probably following an American terminology. But it's greaseproof paper in the UK. Once you lay that on top, what you then want to do is wet the kitchen roll underneath. And that wants to be in a reservoir of water, and that will soak through, just lightly soak through the greaseproof paper. You put your paint on top of the greaseproof paper and it will keep it workable for longer. It will keep the moisture in the paint and stop it from drying out, and it's called a wet palette. There's a selection of the brushes I'm using. So now this is a difficult step for most people, and I'm just using a rubber black colour here. You could use something from the Tamiya range, although they don't brush paint that easily. I think that's a Vallejo colour I've got, and splodge it straight on where you don't want it. Typical, I've done every wheel, and as soon as I turn the camera on, I go right over the rim. So we're just trying to paint the rubber wheel that sits up to this rim. You can do this a number of ways. You can keep your wheels separate and use a wheel mask. So you spray them black, put the circle template over them, and then spray them olive drab, and that'll give you a nice clean rubber look. Or you can brush paint them, and if you're going to do that, you want a nice wide brush. You don't want to use too small a brush. You want to keep the brush loaded well, keep the paint watered down and thin but not too thin, so we get smooth coats, and then just rest your finger on the model and you should be able to get a nice smooth even coat around and keep the detail. So here we're putting the sand shields on, and I found these quite difficult to fit actually. So if you're going to put these on, you want to just work your way around every point, making sure they're fixed where they're meant to be, and maybe glue one end, even use a bit of super glue just to tack it before the plastic glue goes off, and then work your way around. And you can see some glue stains there, and you can touch that up with the same paint. You might also be able to see some of the streaking I've done there on the side of the hull. Next up, we're doing the Italian scheme. So we want to do a freehand camouflage, which is a bit daunting. You could stop at the previous step and just do a general Sherman. They were all green. But what I've done here is thinned down some XF59. That's the desert yellow, I think it's called. And I'm just going in very close. It's very thin. It's probably 80% thinners or maybe more. Low air pressure, 0.2 needle. And I'm just sketching the lines using the template that's in the instructions and then starting to fill that in. So I'll leave you with this in real time, a little bit of music, just so you can see what my technique is. Unfortunately, because of the angle of the camera, it's difficult to see a lot of what I'm doing, but I'm just building it up very slowly as we go around, and any overspray you can tighten up with the green afterwards. Now you can see just finishing up the turret, just doing that sketching in. You can see how thin the paint is. It's better to go over with 2 or 3 light coats than try and do it all in one coat. And at this stage I wouldn't worry too much about any overspray and the tightness of the camouflage pattern. It can always be cleaned up, and we can also then do this sort of overspraying. So I've mixed up a lighter version of the olive drab again, and I'm just doing a very thin mist coat all over. What that will do is it will cut down on some of the overspray from the camouflage. It will also tie the 2 colours together, so it will mute down the desert camouflage yellow that's on there, and it will tie it in with the olive drab. It's just a nice little technique. After that, it's time for the decals. Now, I haven't gone too much into depth here because I've got a separate video showing you how the basics of decals, but these are Tamiya decals, mainly on the turret. And all I've done is put a very nice shiny gloss coat on using X22 from the Tamiya range. I've put the decals on. They are notoriously thick, and you can see the sort of edge of the decal. So once they're on, I've then built up the clear over the top. So more X22, just building it up in light coats, 2 or 3 light coats, and then even sanding a little bit in between just to sort of sand the edge of that clear down. And you're using the gloss to kind of build up an edge and then sanding that back down. You obviously don't need to worry about that too much. Having a nice glossy coat surface for the decals to go on should alleviate many of your problems. We're going to approach the weathering, and I'm going to step it up a little bit here from what we've done previously in the beginner's guide and bring in some enamel products. So we've got two here. We've got dry step splashes, which is on the right there, and we've got a pigment, European Earth, and then we've also got a wash that we'll see later at a later date as well. So this pigment's very good just for sprinkling in, and we'll show that later on, into this dry splashes, and you can use that as a kind of way of fixing it onto the model, and it just gives nice dust and mud effects. But for starters, we're going to do what's called a panel line wash or pin washing. It's the same thing. For aircraft, we call it panel line washes. We just follow the panel lines of the aircraft, and for Armour, it's called pin washing, but it's the same thing. So any lines that we see, so where doors join and things are bolted together, I'm just going to run on with this odorless thinners that we saw just earlier, just to kind of wet the trench where we want it to run to, if you think of it like that. And it's, not over the top, not too much, just moistening it, so that then when we go on with the neat enamel product, the wash, it will track along there a lot easier than if it's dry. And this is all over a matte coat, it's important to say, because I don't overcoat this now. So what we're left with at the end of this is all the natural finishes from all these products. We don't need to do gloss coats anymore or matte coats, it's all done. So what I use is Tamiya XF 86, and then do all of this over the top of that. So as you can see, we just kind of track the lines as best we can. You won't get it in there. The whole point, you will get it sort of outside, and it will be quite heavy, and that's the whole point of this. So the reason we're using enamel over acrylic is we can bring the qualities of the paints into our benefit. So what we're going to do is thin the enamel products that we're putting on with enamel thinner all over acrylic paint, so none of those thinners are going to attack the acrylic paint. So it means we can manipulate the paint that we're putting on top, which is just thinned enamel paint really, but called a wash, and now going on with neat thinners, we're not attacking the paint underneath. So if we were using an acrylic wash, we wouldn't be able to control it the same way. In fact, it's very difficult to control some acrylic washes, and again, if you went down the other way, you would attack the paint. So it's very useful to use products that don't attack each other. So this is this shows the benefit, because what we can do now is where we're at either side of the line, we can just run along with the thinner, being quite rough as well, because it's not going to attack the acrylic below it, and just kind of knock it back into the line, clean it up a little bit, and then we go on with some cotton buds just to take off the excess. This is more for drying really than anything else, because the less it's on there, the quicker it dries. And you can also take off some of the excess around these lines as well. You can also do this back the other way. So if you're thinking about like an aircraft cockpit, for instance, and you want to paint in all the little details, and it's, you're not very good with a brush. Well, if you paint the cockpit in acrylic, and then you paint the details in enamel, if you go over where you want the paint to go and the enamel paint ends up on the bit that's not meant to be there, then you can just use enamel thinner to clean it off. If you use acrylic paint, you can't clean it off as easy. So it's just using the properties of the materials we're using to our benefit, really. And here you can see working over with a number of different brushes. Quite a lot of them are dry brushes, they don't have thinner on them. The thinner is only on those initial brushes that you saw, and it's just a way of blending, really, is what we're doing. You will get slight staining to the paint colour, but that's good. That's called a filter, and it's an unintentional byproduct of what we're doing here, so we're not trying to put a filter on. That's a different thing for another day. But with the pin wash, where you do stain the colours, it actually again helps tie everything together, so it's really not a bad thing. But I would suggest avoiding what you do sometimes see, which is like a sludge wash. So you get a big brush, you go over the whole model with your wash, and then you wipe it back with the thinners. That's not so good, because that will stain everything and that will ruin all the little finesse that we've built up in our paintwork, and it just tends to darken everything, and then you need to really think about putting the highlights back in. Whereas with this technique, all we're trying to do is control the darkening with the wash in specific areas, and then when we go over, we can just blend it back like we've been doing. And it's really forced shadows is what we're doing, but it instantly makes the model look better. If you have a freshly painted model, you take a picture of it and then you do a pin wash and you take a picture of it, I guarantee you'll prefer it after a pin wash. It always just looks so much better. It just makes all the details pop. And then as you go on further, the models always look better when they're weathered. And there you can see the entire process over the hull, and it's all been cleaned back and dried off now, and you can see the effect. It has just muted the colour a little bit. It's just taken some of that sort of intensity off it. You'll be able to see the difference with the turret that hasn't had any washes. So you see how it's lighter, but almost too light. So getting to the point where we are on the hull is good, but if you go too far, you'll make it too dark. So it's just working in between that and just trying to get a feel for it. But generally, if you just follow what I've just done, you can't really go far wrong, because you can't put too much on because you can get it off. It is trickier over a matte coat once you let the enamel product really dry on. If you leave it for a couple of days, it's very, very hard to get off. If you try and remove it sort of after it's just tacked on for about 30 minutes or an hour, it's much easier. So bear that in mind as well. The longer you leave it, the harder it is to get it off. You can get it off. It won't forever be there, but it's something to bear in mind. You want to try and do the whole process. It'd be better to work in stages. So if you only got an hour, just do the side of the hull or the back or whatever. Work on that area, and then the next session, work on the following area and go on like that, rather than putting it all on and then thinking you got sort of 2 hours of weathering. Now the turret is done, and that's brought it all in, and I think you will agree it brings the model's moved on to the next stage. Really, it's brought us up a level from where we were with just the nicely painted model. And that's the thing with weathering. You can go as far as you want. If you're willing to spend 6 months on painting and weathering a model, it's going to look really good. If you spend an evening, it's not going to look as good. So the amount of time you put in, the amount of layers you can add, and the way you can build up the subtleties, all of that brings the whole story, if you like, for a cliche, of the model. The more you put into it, the better it is. It always shows. So now we're thinking about using these splashes. So their intention, this is from MIG, AK do a range of this as well. It's, for argument's sake, the same thing. So whichever you choose, they're just enamel washes. There's a whole load of them. So these splashes are just a heavier pigmented version of their washes. And the idea really, as you can see, is very thick and gloopy. The idea of this is its consistency, that you can splash it onto the model and it gives nice effects. That's not what we're using it for, because obviously if we thin it down, we just have a very heavily pigmented, sandy coloured wash. And the thing with dry step is, it's got that classic colour that just looks great for Normandy, anything in Russia, anything in Italy. It's just got that, light dusty colour. It's just really looks the part, so that's why we go for that. So as you can see, I'm just thinning that down now, and that's with the same thinners that we've used. But you will notice that compared to the wash, which ends up being quite thin, this is still a heavy, there's a heavy pigment in it, and that is going to be very useful. So take a deep breath and think twice before you do this if you've got any worries, but you do have to just get it on the model. This does look a bit messy, and it does look like it's going on without any real intention, but what I am doing is thinking about where I want the deposits to end up, because like I said, this liquid is carrying quite a heavy pigment, so when it dries, that pigment is going to end up on the model. So we don't want to just splash it onto areas without thinking about it. So obviously around the road wheels, where the tyres meet the tracks, where the tracks meet the ground, where areas aren't going to be dusty, you don't really want to plaster it over. So you wouldn't want to go heavy like this all over the top of the vehicle or the turret, for instance. That wouldn't be very useful. But doing this over the side that's going to get hit with dust, and that's what we're going for, a kind of dryish, matted on dust. I mean, Italy was a bit wet, so it was matted on. That's where you want to kind of try and concentrate putting this on. So as you can see, once we get into it, it's starting to run around the model a little bit, and that's not a problem because we can control it. And I'm going to do all of this process in one session. It's the same thing again, you know, don't put all of this on then walk away for a month, because you'll find it very difficult to get off. But as we go round, just doing the other side here, we're just building it up now, and we're going to get ready for the next stage, which includes the pigments. And before we do that, we can just see where it's building up, the extra liquid. I'm just going on now and just wicking that off, and this shows the aspect of, although it looks like we're plastering it on the model, what we're actually doing is making sure the pigment's going to end up where we want it to be. We're not just splodging it on without thinking about it. So that's why we're going back now to take some of that extra thinner off, so we don't have too much pooling in areas where we don't want it. It's an important step. You can use kitchen roll, you can use cotton buds, and you can use dry brushes. They'll soak it up as well with the capillary action. Again, there just on the front fender, you see that once you take that off, that bead of liquid is unnatural, and when you take it off, it looks more natural. A hairdryer is useful for this as well, because what we want shortly is to be able to dry this off, and that's where a hairdryer comes in very, very useful. You can just go on at the high heat but low air and just warm it up, and the enamel tends to go off better with heat rather than air. You know, some stuff dries with air. Well, the enamel reacts to the heat more than the air, and too much air can make it blow around where you don't want it to go. So here's the next step: European earth. So what we're going to do here is load up a brush that isn't wet and just tap it on. Again, same principles, only tapping it onto the areas where we want this pigment to build up. And what we're using is the dust wash we've just put on. We're using that as a fixer, so it's something to hold the pigment there. You can just brush pigment on, but it makes a very sort of dusty look, and then it gets locked into the kind of matte surface. Whereas this, it just sits where the wetter the area, the more it sits, and it gives a very nice effect. So you can see, just going over the model. Now, this is going to go everywhere. This pigment is like that. It does go everywhere. So it's going to go all over the top of the hole, and it's going to go all the areas we don't want it. But as long as we don't scrub it in, we can just blow that off, and it's not a problem. So there you can see it's all over the model, all over the bench, all over everywhere, but the eagle-eyed among you might see that I'm actually doing this on pieces of kitchen roll, because I just scrunch them up and chuck it away and all the pigment's gone. So that's a nice little trick as well. Now, the first thing before we get into any sort of mess is we want to get that pigment off that's on the top. The best way is making sure there's nothing in your airbrush and just using the air, and you can just blow it off at high pressure. And I'm not doing that very much here because I'm just going to blow everything across my table, but I'm just showing you the principle. Now, once we've dried that on, and this was actually 5 minutes with a hairdryer to get to this point, drying it back, you can see that sort of 80% of it is dried on now. There's still some wetter areas, but it's good enough for the next step. And you can see the effect we've got there as well. You know, it's nice, but we're going to make it look better. It's a bit too intense at the minute. It's a bit too over the top, a bit too uncontrolled. So we're going over the top of the hole with one of those brushes again that hasn't got anything on it, and we're just brushing away any of the pigment that we don't want. It will blend into the surface, but it'll all add to the effect, so that's fine. Once you've got rid of the pigment where you don't want it, we then go to the side and we just check along, and then we're just going to brush down. So using the kind of gravity, so straight down where it would run off, we're just going to put in what we hope is sort of rain marks and wet marks showing. And you'll start to see that the pigment will now just show itself in areas that looks really effective. It's almost like the reverse of dry brushing. It's kind of weird. Now, again, on the rubber pads as well, we're just going to rub it off there because we want they're the contact points with the ground, so they wouldn't be covered in this dust. And that's easy as that. Again, where the rubber tyres are meeting the rubber tread, you just want to work that off as well. And you can obviously take a little bit off the tracks as well, because they wouldn't be totally covered. And I must stress, this is not with thinner, this is with dry products. Dry brushes, dry bits of tissue, and dry cotton buds. If you do anything wet, you go back, the pigment gets wet again and it ruins the effect. And there you can see, I think that is looking quite effective for a kind of dryish, dusty look, because this is Italy, dust roads running along Italy in the sort of summer. I think it was, can't remember now. 1943. And again, just getting that pigment out of the places where we don't want it, but also using it to our benefit. So as obviously on the front, it would be completely plastered in dust. And not forgetting the turret as well. Again, now all we're really doing is using the same brush that's already got a bit of pigment on it and just running around just to, again, it's almost like a filter. Using the pigment as a filter just to blend it in and tie it into the hull. Because it's very easy to have a clean turret on a dirty hull, and that stands out. So we just want to try and avoid that. And these wide brushes are very good for that. And again, lastly, just blowing off any excess now with the airbrush all over it. And that's pretty good. Now we'll come back to this to finish off the weathering, but we've got to do a few other little bits now. And that, first off, is stowage. Now this comes in the kit. So what I initially do is like to just place it out on the model, just to get a feeling of where it's going to go and how I'm going to have it. And then glue that on. So you can take it all back off again and glue it on, or you can run glue in and around it. All of this stowage comes in the kit, so I thought we'd make a point of using it. And now with PVA glue, I'm just going to stick those bits on here, there and everywhere, and then run a little bit of thin it with water and run a bit of liquid PVA glue in and around it once I'm happy with where it's placed, just so it locks on. One of the main things as well that we're going to add on in here is the figures. So I've just got them to one side. They've just been sprayed with a base coat that is actually incorrect. They're meant to be green, not a sandy colour. So I do respray them. And once all the stowage and tools and everything is how you want it, we now need to give those a wash just to tie them in. Not worrying too much about the dust. Really for effect, I want them to stand out, but obviously they would be covered in dust. So now just using the same wash that we use for the model and just doing panel line washes. Again, that you see how much better the wooden box looks with a wash. It actually looks like wood. Now, a nice trick on the tools, if you paint the handles dark yellow or desert yellow, a kind of sandy yellow, you can then go on with clear orange from the Tamiya range, and you just paint it along like that. And once it's on there, if you just streak it a little bit with the brush, it looks like wood grain. They are gloss colours, so you need to matte it down, but it's a nice effect. It just sort of stains the wood. Just adds to the realism a little bit. You can also use oil paints to do the same thing, but here we're just sticking with the Tamiya range. Now with figures, I do it this way, just using Citadel paints because it's what I've got. I wouldn't suggest going and investing in Citadel paints. You really just need to follow the same basic principles here, which is a dark, medium and light flesh tone with a suitable sort of wash. But if you do want to do it following it along with the Citadel way of doing it that I do, this is for very basic. There's far better ways to paint figures than what I'm doing here, but if you want to just do it the way I'm doing it, then this is how I do it. And this is for very simple, just to give some colour on the faces when you're putting chaps in a tank. So straight off with Bugman's Glow, what I'm using here is a wet palette like we made in the last video. I'm just thinning down that paint with some water, rolling the brush till I'm happy with how it's coming out. I kind of roll the brush to get to a point. And then we just go on base coating. So really we just want to pick out any of the flesh areas with this Bugman's Glow. And it's just about going on, making sure the paint is smooth and thin, so it's not going on all gloopy, but we also want enough coverage to block out the green as well. You can do two thin coats, but I find that you don't always have to. And as we're going to do 3 different flesh tone colours here, it's all about making sure you're not adding too many layers, because then it starts to build up and you lose the detail. And there we've got a nice smooth base coat there of Bugman's Glow. And it's just trying to keep neat as well. So then we've got this Reichland flesh shade. And now we'll just run over with that. And this is just a pinky wash really, pinky red wash. And it will go into all the details and the recesses and give you some depth there. And then we're on with the next colour, Cadian Flesh Tone. And now this is just going to start to pick up the high points and leave some of the depth that we've already shown. You can see as well that I'm not using a tiny brush. It's better to have a slightly bigger brush, not one that curls at the tip like this. That's bad brush husbandry. But using the larger brush, it tends to hold more paint, so you can put it on smoother. And you just want to train yourself to be able to paint the details in. And again, it's just really going around sketching because it's thin enough that it's allowing some of the base coat to show through, and you can kind of sketch it in once you get the hang of it. I must stress, very basic stuff this. And the green on the tunic and the helmet, they're not the green that's going to finish with, so I'm not worried about getting the face on any of the face colours on that, because I'm going to go over and touch that up. So now I'm just kind of looking at some of the higher points. So we've got the cheek, the upper lip, the nose, the T section. All of that wants to just show a little bit brighter than the rest of the face. You can see on the one that I did not on camera, it's sharper and better because it's difficult painting on camera. So now I'm going to do a mix of Kislev Flesh, Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone. I'm just going to mix them together in varying different quantities to give me the colour and shade that I want, and I just kind of play around with it on the model and blend it together really. So again, look, because this is a lighter colour, we're now just working on the high points. So we've got any of the areas that will catch the light, so chin, upper lip, nose, cheeks, forehead. And as it dries off, it will blend in and give you the effect of a reasonably okay looking face from afar when all you're really doing is looking at the tank. Figure painter I am not, but it's a whole world. When you actually look at these guys who can do figure painting well, it's quite a skill. But that's more or less good enough for the face for a first. Again, we're approaching this as if it was your first go at it. So now we're just going to pick out some areas in leather. And that's around the front of this sort of helmet, cap, whatever it is. I guess it is a helmet, tanker's helmet. It's got a leather trim. And moving the thing that you're painting around so you can get easier access is a good way to go about it. And now, like I said, we're just going to paint in the green as well. So this could be any colours. This could be from the Vallejo range, whatever you've got. I've just got the Citadel to hand, so that's what I'm using. And again, now tightening up that leather because the helmet is kind of like a darker green than the tunic. And once we're happy with all of that, we go back and use the same wash that we used for the vehicle. And again, this time we do just plaster it all over the tunic, not the face, and the helmet, and then wick that off with a cotton bud, and it leaves a nice effect. I did mess up here because I'm using some old wash that was there from the day before, and it didn't dry well, it dried glossy, and I had to mat these down, but you shouldn't have to do that generally. And now it's time to finish the tank. So the last way of tying in this dust effect is using Buff XF57 from the Tamiya range. Very heavily thinning it, really thin it down, and then you can see here, if you look over the black, you can see a kind of triangle of mist. It's just coming back now at the bottom of the screen, and it's tying all of the dust work together. It's difficult to see because it's so thin, but that's the effect. We don't want it to be heavy. We don't want to lose all of our subtle blending that we've got. We just want to tie everything together with just a uniform dust coat, and that buff is very good for doing that. And having a turntable is a very useful way of getting around a model as well, if you can do that. This is the Tamiya turntable. It's absolutely excellent. Best thing I've bought. I don't know why I didn't have one 5 years ago. Only just got it. But it's very nice. And again, the same principle is work up from the tracks and the wheels, and then sort of slow it down a little bit as you get up to the top of the hull, but you still want it to drift up a little bit onto the turret, otherwise that will show as being a bit too clean. And that really is it for this model. You can go a lot further. You could put an aerial in, you could put some cotton across, some thin cotton across where all the stowage is to show how that's tied down. You could add more details, but for an out-of-the-box, nice sort of refresher build, this series should have given you all that you need to know to bring a model up to a reasonable standard. And there's no reason why you couldn't do it for your first model or your 10th model. Or you might be an aircraft modeler and you've always been scared of doing armour. Well, this should be able to help you along the way. So I'm going to leave you now just with a few shots of it, and we're going to add the figures in as well for this. And that just leaves me to say thank you for watching. If any of you guys want to help support me or follow along, then let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. There's some links down in the description box if you would like to send any support over. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing. Like the video if you do like what you've seen, and as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.